Okay, so you are the few tonight, but Baruch Hashem, things should be based on quality rather than quantity. So thank you very much for coming. And tonight's shir is sponsored for a refuah shlema for Nata ben Zisel and Ashira Nechama Tova bat Sarah Baruch ben Frida, and as always for all those whose health has been affected by the war, and especially for the safe and quick return of our brothers and sisters held in captivity, and ultimately for the lasting unity of Am Yisrael. In addition, an Aliyat Neshama for Yitzchak Hirsch ben Eliezer and Bella bat Shoshana. Again, all of the learning should be an Aliyat Neshama for them. And finally, for the whole month of Adar Sheni, Rena and Mark Questel are sponsoring this lecture series in honor of Rabbi Breitowitz. Thank you very much for a speedy victory in Gaza and a safe return of all of our chayalim and a speedy return of all our hostages. Amen, amen, v'amen. Finally, good news, Yiboneh wants to thank all of those who have contributed towards the purchase of a Sefer Torah. Baruch Hashem, we have reached 90% of our goal. We are still looking for partners to complete the payment for this Torah scroll. Once again, as I've said a number of times already, this will be used as part of a learner's minyan for weekday services, not just for Shabbos, which is something, a need that is simply not being met yet. You can contribute to commemorate the memory of a loved one, or to simply share your love of Torah and your achdus with Klal Yisrael. Donations can be made either on the website or by link on the YouTube description box. In addition, the Pesach Seder Yiboneh is filling up. So here too you can get information on the YouTube description box or on the website.
Who's running it this year?
I'll have the privilege of I don't want to say running it, but I'll be reading the Haggadah for people, and Baruch Hashem. Unless you're scared, I sometimes go a little long, but I'll try to be a little more disciplined. And I think overall, people who come have a very, very positive experience. Okay, we have B'ezras Hashem Purim coming up. Before Purim, though, we have Tanis Esther. So, and we have Parshat Zachor. So there are actually a few different things that are coming up in connection with Purim, and I'm going to talk briefly on each of those things, and culminating with Purim itself. First of all, on Thursday, we have what is called the Fast of Esther. And there are two different opinions in the Rishonim. What is the origin of the Fast of Esther? It's important to know that the Fast of Esther is not even mentioned in the Gemara. It is actually a post-Talmudical fast that dates from the time of the Gaonim. In fact, in the time of Chazal, the 13th of Adar, which is the normal date for Tanis Esther, was actually a Yom Tov in and of itself. Not a Yom Tov connected to Purim, a Yom Tov connected to Chanukah. It was Nicanor's day. Nicanor was a Greek general who was defeated in a major war around the Chanukah revolution. And because of that, Yud Gimel Adar was Yom Nicanor, where you weren't allowed to fast. Later, for various reasons, that kind of dropped out, and Lehepech, it got replaced by Tanis Esther, where you're supposed to fast. But either way, whatever the historical time frame is, what is the origin of the idea of Tanis Esther? So most people assume, and this is the simple pshat, that Tanis Esther is because of the 3-day fast that is recorded in Megillat Esther, that when Esther got word of Haman's decree, she instructed Mordechai to go and gather all of the Jews. They should fast for 3 days, and then she will go to the king. And to commemorate that fast, we have Tanis Esther, but instead of doing it for 3 days, we do it for 1 day. 3 days would be too rough. Now, let me just point out, chronologically, the 3-day fast of Esther was not in the month of Adar at all. It was almost a year early. It was during Nisan. The fast was 13th, 14th, 15th day of Nisan. And that is the day that Esther went into Achashverosh. And Haman got hung the next day. Haman got hung on the second day of Pesach. The war was almost a year later, 11 months later. In fact, the Yerushalmi points out that the 15th of Nisan is, of course, the first day of Pesach. And they were fasting on the first day of Pesach. They did fulfill matzah because they would eat at night. So they ate the night of Pesach, they ate matzah, but they fasted on Yom Tov. So, if the Tainus of Esther commemorates the 3-day fast of Esther, it's a very imperfect commemoration because, number one, Esther's fast was 3 days, and we only fast 1 day. Number two, Esther's fast was Nisan, but we fast adjacent to Purim. But okay, that's still logical. It is connected to the Purim miracle. We don't like to fast in Nisan, so we push it before Purim. But there's actually a whole other reason the Rishonim give for Tainus Esther, that it represents an unrecorded fast. And that is the day that Jews go to war, or went to war. They would fast to be zocheh to the rachamim of Hashem. Now, we would think not that way. We would think when a person goes to battle, they bedafka want to have a good breakfast, either because they think it may be their last meal, or they just need to be healthy and energetic. And yet, Yidden who realized that their ultimate victory is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they would actually fast on the day they went to war. So the Tainus Esther was an actual fast of the Jewish people who were fighting their enemies on the 13th of Adar. So it's not connected, and why is it called the fast of Esther really? It's not really the fast of Esther, it is the fast connected to the miracle that Esther effected, but it is a fast of Yud Gimel Adar. So we have two different origins for the fast of Esther. One is, it is a Zachor for the 3-day fast. That's recorded in the Megillah. The other is, it was a fast of the Chayolim before they went to Milchama. One way or the other, though, we do have this fast called the fast of Esther. As you would imagine, it's extraordinarily lenient. So if people don't feel well, we're very, very lenient. In fact, in some circles, women are automatically exempted from the fast of Esther. And I believe, I don't want to say for sure, I believe that in the brisk yeshiva, the boys are told they shouldn't fast on the fast of Esther because they're weak and it would affect their learning and the like. I don't want to say for sure, but I believe that is the case. But still, if you're able to fast, you should fast. Now, what's interesting is this. This year, we're not fasting on the 13th of Adar, because what is it? The 14th of Adar is Saturday night, Sunday. Right? Yerushalayim Purim is Sunday night, Monday, which is the 15th. But the 14th of Adar is Sunday. So the 13th of Adar would be Shabbos. We, of course, don't fast on Shabbos. So you would think, so let's fast on Friday. Right? If we don't fast on Shabbos, which is 13, let's fast on Friday. So the answer is, there too, with some exceptions, we generally do not want there to be a fast on Friday because we don't want you to enter Shabbos not feeling that well. Because if you were to fast on Friday, the truth is the 10th of Teves is an exception, but b'derech klal, we don't like fasting on Friday because you're not going to feel well when Shabbos begins. So therefore, when the 14th of Adar is on Sunday or on Shabbos, Tainus Esther is pushed to Thursday. Now, here's an interesting question. When the 9th of Av falls out on Shabbos, okay, Yom Kippur we fast on Shabbos, that's a separate thing. But even the 9th of Av, when it falls out on Shabbos, we don't fast on Shabbos. So when do we fast? We fast after Shabbos. We fast Saturday night and Sunday. And the Gemara says, because you don't want to bring sadness early. So how come, interesting question, every other fast that you don't fast on Shabbos, When it would fall out on Shabbos or Friday, you push it off. Tainus Esther, when it would fall out on Shabbos or Friday, you fast on Thursday. You bring it on early. Why is Tainus Esther different than the 9th of Av? So the Shem Shmuel says a wonderful answer. It's one of those answers that once you hear it, you wonder, how could you even ask the question? It's such a simple answer. He says the following: why is it the case that when we fast for the 9th of Av, I push off the fast? Right? Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos. I don't fast on Thursday. I fast on Sunday. So the Gemara gives a reason. Akdume paranusa lo makdaminan. We don't want to bring tragedies on earlier than we have to. The fast of the 9th of Av is a fast of tragedy. It is a fast of Avelut, a fast of mourning, a fast of calamity. It is a sad day of the year. Why should we bring it on earlier than we have to? So if we can't observe it in the proper day, Chazal said, don't do it early. Push it off as much as you can. The fast of Esther is exactly the opposite. Whether you look at it as Esther's 3-day fast, or whether you look at it as the Chayalim fasting, it is a fast that brought us redemption and Yeshua. It was a fast that is not mourning a tragedy. It's commemorating a salvation that the Almighty brought upon us. It was a fast that prevented tragedy, rather than a fast that commemorates tragedy. As a result, there's nothing wrong with bringing it on early. Bring it on. Meaning, the mood of Tainus Esther is not sad at all. Right? Normally, we associate every Tainus with a certain sadness, whether it's Tisha B'Av, whether it's the 17th of Tammuz, where the Luchos were smashed, whether it's the 10th of Teves, when Nebuchadnezzar began his siege against Jerusalem, whether it's Tzom Gedalia, where the great Gedalia was assassinated after the Chorban Beis HaMikdash. These are days of sadness, days of tragedy, days of grieving, days of mourning. What's Tainus Esther? Tainus Esther is the reminder to us that when we turn to Hashem with prayer and sincerity and purity of heart, He will answer our prayers. It's actually a Tainus that should give you great joy and simcha. And therefore the Shem Shmuel says there is no problem with bringing it on early. It's not included in the principle of not bringing on tragedies before you have to. Again, so it's really such a simple answer, in effect, that it really answers the question in a wonderful way. So that's the idea of Tainus Esther. Now, this year, everybody gets the benefit because, when you keep Purim on the 14th and you have a regular Tainus Esther on the 13th, that means you're not allowed to eat until you hear Megillah, even though it's dark. Maybe you can have water or something. So that actually means that people sometimes have to suffer through a long Megillah reading before they can eat. This year, we don't have that problem because the fast is going to be over Thursday night. There's no Megillah reading until later. In Yerushalayim, however, we never have that problem, right? So that's another reason to live in Yerushalayim. Because even in a regular year where we keep Tainus Esther on the 13th, when the fast is over, you're entering the 14th, but we don't read Megillah on the 14th. We read Megillah on the 15th. So as a result, Tainus Esther does not go directly into Purim. In Yerushalayim, there will always be a day off. So that makes it a little easier, meaning to say you can break the fast at night. You don't have to wait till after the Megillah. So among many, many reasons to live in Yerushalayim, maybe it's a minor reason, but this is a benefit that you get based on Shushan Purim. Okay, so that's Tainus Esther, which we're going to have this year on Thursday. Obviously, as you know, it's a day fast. It is not the night before. It begins dawn. Amud HaShachar, and everything has many, many opinions, but the standard opinion is it is 72 fixed minutes before sunrise. So whenever sunrise is, go back 72 minutes, that's where the fast begins. And therefore, if you get up before the Amud HaShachar point, you are still allowed to eat and drink. So that's always the big question people have to raise. What's more important, sleep or coffee? That's going to be one of the major questions of life that people have to determine. Okay, so we then go from Thursday, we go to Shabbos. And Shabbos, in addition to the regular Torah reading, which is Parshas Vayikra, we have a special maftir, Parshas Zachor, which reminds us, Hashem says, remember what Amalek did to you when you were in the desert. They encountered you and they attacked those who were weak and straggling, and they did not fear God. And it shall be that when God gives you rest among your enemies, Timcha, you shall erase the memory of Amalek. Lo tishkach. So there's actually 3 mitzvot connected to the nation of Amalek. One is a positive mitzvah to physically destroy them by eradicating their memory. Timcha, eradicate their memory. That actually means, it's a funny thing, remember to obliterate their memory. Interesting. Remember to utterly forget them. But basically, this is the mitzvah of machia, eradication. As a matter of strict halacha, we don't have that mitzvah today simply because Amalek is not around. Again, I know people say Hamas is Amalek, but Amalek is also a very specific nation that is descended from a certain source, and Hamas may have the ideology of Amalek, and I'm willing to agree with that, but technically they're not the Amalek of the Torah. So there's a mitzvah to destroy Amalek, number 1. Number 2, there is a positive mitzvah to remember Amalek verbally, to declare that we remember the evil of Amalek. And there's a negative commandment, which is expressed in the negative, lo tishkach, never forget. So eradicate, remember, never forget. So even though we don't have machia today, because they're not around, or we can't identify them, we do have a chiyuv of zechira. Now the question is, how often do you have to remember? The pashtus is, you have to remember all the time, every day. So, if you look at in a siddur, you will find after Shachris, in many siddurim, something called the 6 zechiros, the 6 remembrances, or in some siddurim there are 10 remembrances. And some siddurim, there are 4 remembrances. There are different things that are counted or not counted. But one of the remembrances is to remember Amalek. Zachor, Eis Asher Asalacha Amalek. And the people that say these 6 zechiros, or these 4 zechiros, or these 10 zechiros, will say this verse every single day. Zachor, Eis Asher Asalacha Amalek. The question is, though, most of us don't do that. And most of us fulfill our obligation to remember Amalek once a year, the Shabbos before Purim, and that's called Parshas Zachor. So question number 1 is, where do you get the once a year thing? If the Torah says you shall remember Amalek, what Amalek did to you, why do you do it once a year? So the Gemara says a reason. The Gemara says that it takes a whole year, 12 months, before you really forget something. A memory can remain relatively fresh. So I think the Gemara seems to be assuming better memories than most of us have, but it says a memory can remain relatively fresh for up to a year. So if you hear Parshas Zachor once, that'll carry you for 12 months. After the 12 months, it gets weaker and you need a booster shot. So the goal of Parshat Zachor once a year is to keep a memory in your mind the entire year. Because it takes 12 months for a memory to fade. That's the assumption. So based on this, the Chassam SEFER points out the following. Normally, there's 12 months or less between one Parsha Zachor and another Parsha Zachor. But sometimes there'll be 13 months, like now. Last year was a non-leap year. This year is a leap year. Last year there was one Adar. This year there are two Adars. From last year's Parsha Zachor to this year's Parsha Zachor is 13 months, not 12 months. So the Chasam Sofer says, how could we go 12 months without a Parsha Zachor to remind us, to revive our memory? So based on this, he was machadesh a very fascinating halacha. He said, it's too late to do it now, the year before a leap year, when they reach Parshas Kiseitze, that's where the Parsha Zachor thing is, and that is read before Rosh Hashanah, shortly before Rosh Hashanah. You should have kavanah in the Parsha of the week to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Parsha Zachor. Of course, the Baal Koreh has to have kavanah as well, and that way you get your Parsha Zachor booster shot without a hefsek, without an interruption of more than 12 months. And even though, obviously, that Kriya is not the Shabbos before Purim, but keep in mind, there are two different things. In other words, the Doraisa says you have to verbalize or hear somebody verbalize Zechiras Amalek once a year. Yeah, that's true. That's Doraisa. But the Torah doesn't say it has to be before Purim. That's what the sages said to connect it to Haman. The Torah doesn't even say it has to be from a Sefer Torah. So consequently, the Chasam Sofer says the Doraisa imperative of not going 12 months without verbally remembering Amalek, that you could be Makayim in Parshas Ki Seitze before Rosh Hashanah. And then by the time Parshas Zachor comes around, you'll fulfill the rabbinic requirement of mentioning it or having it mentioned the Shabbos right before Purim. Very, very interesting Chiddush of the Chasam Sofer. I usually talk about it, but I always talk about it too late. I talk about it like before the relevant Parsha Zachor. We've missed it already. We should talk about it before Rosh Hashanah. We should talk about the Parsha Zachor. Okay. So this is why Parsha Zachor is once a year, and Chazal were misakein that once a year should be the Shabbos before Purim, because Haman comes from Amalek, and therefore we want to connect the destruction of Haman with the destruction of Amalek. Now, it does not say beferish in the Megillah that Haman is from Amalek, but it does call him Haman the Agagite, Haman the Agagi, and we know from the book of Shmuel, Agag was the king of Amalek that Shaul spared, and even though Shmuel finished Agag off, but in the small amount of time between Shaul letting him go and Shmuel killing him, Agag impregnated a woman, and that woman was the ancestor of Haman. You see in a very, very powerful way, which may be relevant to what's going on today, the severe cost of misplaced mercy. Shaul did not kill Agag out of compassion. It's very clear. Whatever the cheshbon was, maybe because he's a fellow king, Shaul had rachamim on Agag. He said, listen, I did the job 99.9%. Let this guy live. Looks like rachamim. Out of that rachamim came Haman generations later. Haman almost wiped out the entire Jewish people. And it wasn't just he had a bad thought. The Gemara actually says, for reasons maybe we'll get to, that the Jewish nation in that generation was deserving of destruction. Had we not done Shuvah through the fasting and everything else, Haman's plan would have been carried out. It could have been carried out. Which means the Rachamim that Shaul showed, one Amalekite, almost resulted in the total destruction of the Jewish people. When Gilad Shalit was released, and of course, I mean, we're all very grateful, and she'd be healthy. God forbid, I don't want to cast any aspersion, but just to note the empirical fact, he was released in exchange for 1,000 terrorists. One of those terrorists was Sinwar, who was the architect who was serving a life sentence. Not only that, we also gave him brain surgery. I mean, we did a lot of taivas for him. But he was serving a life sentence in an Israeli jail. He was released as part of a exchange program. And a few years later, he is the mastermind, or was the mastermind of October 7, that killed, at the time, on that day, 1,200 people, including rape and torture, maiming, hostage taking, and people who are still being victimized, as well as the chayalim, whose lives are at risk as they go into war. So, an act of mercy. But you see what an act of mercy can cause when it's not a proper act of mercy. And this was Shaul. So Chazal wanted Parshat Zachor to be connected to Esther, because Megillat Esther is about the destruction of Amalek. And it's so interesting that Mordechai and Esther are descendants of Shaul. And therefore they rectified, they fixed that which Shaul failed to fix. Yeah, I want to point out that insofar as the Torah's commandment of Parshat Zachor is concerned, it didn't have to be on that particular Shabbos. It could be any. It doesn't have to be on Shabbos. It doesn't have to be in a minyan. It doesn't have to be in a Sefer Torah. But it does have to be verbalized. You verbalize. You can use the pasuk or your own words, but if you use the pasuk, you say, Zachor eis asher asa lecha Amalek. You are Makayim, the mitzvah, the Araisa of Zechiras Amalek, the need for a Torah, the need for a minyan, and the need for a Zman, which is the Shabbos before Purim. Those are rabbinic requirements. They are not Torah requirements. That's why the common statement that we always make, that Parshat Zachor is a Torah obligation, needs to be qualified a little bit. Remembering Amalek once a year is a Torah obligation, but it didn't have to take the form, bedafka, of Parshat Zachor. So now let's go back a little bit and let's talk about Amalek. Amalek is was an actual person. Right? The Torah mentions Amalek before attacking us in the desert, before there were a nation. It mentions Esav had a son, Eliphaz. And it describes Eliphaz's many wives. And it describes Eliphaz had a concubine, Pilegesh, wasn't even a wife, a mistress, a concubine, whose name was Timnah. And it says that Timnah had a boy from Eliphaz, whose name was Amalek. So Amalek is the grandson of Esav, the son of Eliphaz, from his Pilegesh, from his concubine, Timnah. Why is that important? Now, the Torah does spend a lot of time. If you look at Parshas Vayishlach and the like, the Torah spends quite a lot of time on giving Esav's family tree, Esav's descendants, Yishmael's descendants. It's quite a big deal in the Torah, at least relatively speaking. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz said, there's some very, very important lessons here that are maybe a little bit disheartening. The Medrash gives us a very interesting backstory to the Eliphaz-Timnah relationship. Timnah came from Egypt, and she was actually of the royal house, just like Hagar actually came from the Paros. Timnah was in the royal family. And Timnah had a great yearning to be connected to the family of Abraham. And she wanted to be accepted as a Gioris, etc. And they rejected her. They thought she was not righteous enough. So Timnah's attitude was, she so much wanted to be connected to Zerah Avram that she said, if I cannot connect to the good side, I'll connect to the bad side, to the Esav side. And if I can't connect as a wife, with the dignity of a wife, I will be a Pilegesh. I'll be a nobody. So her motives were actually very good. She was so, again, misplaced. I mean, you don't say, if I can't marry the tzaddikim of the family, I'll marry the rishonim of the family. That's not logical thinking. But emotionally, it stemmed from her desire to be connected to Kedusha. So why did Amalek turn out so bad? If Timnah had the noblest motivations of connecting to Kedusha, why did Timnah give birth to Amalek? The Hitler, the Russia. So Rav Chaim Shmulevitz used to say, you see from here how powerful and destructive rejection is. Timnah was a rejected woman. Even Eliphaz rejected her in a sense. Eliphaz didn't make her a wife. She was a Pelegish. She could take it. She was righteous enough that she could take it. But her son, little Amalek, somehow absorbed rejection every day of his life. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says, the product of rejection produces Amalek. Now we have to understand this. He's not giving Amalek a pass. He's not saying, oh, we should have mercy on Amalek because they were rejected as a child. You know, it is true. I mean, even Hitler, right? Hitler was rejected. His paintings were rejected. But, you know, many people go through rejection and they don't grow up and murder 6 million people. So we're not negating responsibility. We're not saying, oh, the Amaleks of the world are not responsible. Of course they're responsible. But at the same time, from our perspective, we have to realize the devastating cost that rebounds to us when we reject, when we're marchik. In fact, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz applied this practically. It was very well known that he was extremely reluctant to ever ask a boy to leave the Mir Yeshiva. Even if the guy wasn't learning, the guy wasn't doing very much. So people would ask him, or the Hanhala, other Rebbeim would ask him, you know, why don't you get rid of the guy? And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz's standard line was, I don't want the responsibility for possibly creating more Amaleks in the world. This is the kayach of rejection. You know, we can debate this as a policy, and this, again, maybe I don't need to be skeptical. I mean, one could argue, well, you're actually doing the guy a favor by putting him in a place where he's more productive. Oh, okay, that's fine. But I don't want to debate, you know, his educational policy and the like. But it was predicated on the idea that rejection can create such a rage in a person that he becomes a force of destruction, a force of violence, a force of hate. So in a sense, we have a certain responsibility for creating the Amaleks of the world. It does not take away a one iota from their responsibility. But we need to be aware of our responsibility as well. This is what Rav Chaim Shmulevitz used to say. Again, a very, very powerful idea. Well, Amalek eventually became a nation, kind of a Bedouin nation that wandered around in the desert. And they were the very first nation that attacked us when we left Mitzrayim. So here's the point I want to make. If you look at Tanakh, you see there are 3 times that the Amalekites aggressively attacked us. I'm not counting when we attacked them. The first time is when shortly after we left Mitzrayim, Amalek was the first nation that attacked us. Reishis Goyim Amalek, the first of the nations. The second time Amalek attacked us is also in the Chumash, but it's a hidden reference. 40 years later, when Aaron HaKohen died, and the clouds of glory that enveloped us scattered, because those clouds of glory were in the merit of Aaron. Remember, the man came in the merit of Moshe. The traveling water of well was in the merit of Miriam. The clouds of glory are in the merit of Aaron. When Aaron died in the 40th year, the clouds of glory dispersed. We were vulnerable. So it mentions in the Chumash, we were attacked by Canaanites. And Moshe prayed, and the Jewish people were able to defeat their enemies. This is recorded in Parshas Chukas. But if you look in Rashi, Rashi brings a chazal that says, we were not attacked by Canaanites. We were attacked by Amalekites. Amalek tried to attack us. But since Amalek remembered from the first time around that Moshe Rabbeinu's prayers were effective, they wanted to disguise themselves as Canaanites, so that when Moshe says, save us from the Canaanites, the prayer is not going to work because they're really Amalekites. In other words, they dressed like Canaanim so that Moshe would pray for salvation from Canaanim, and supposedly that would help the Amalekites. Moshe Rabbeinu suspected a disguise. He didn't know for sure. And that's why the Torah says Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer was, God should deliver this nation, whoever they are. Let them be Canaanim, let them be Amalekim, and the like. But this is the second time Amalek attacked us in the desert. Now, the next time Amalek is prominent is in the story of Shaul, when Shaul is commanded to kill. But again, that was we attacked Amalek. It doesn't say Amalek attacked us. But the third time, when Amalek was the aggressor, is the story of Megillas Esther, where it wasn't the nation of Amalek, but Haman or Agagi made a gezerah against Am Yisrael. Right? So we have three places in Tanakh where Amalek tries to destroy us. One, right after Yetziat Mitzrayim. Two, 40 years later, when Aaron died, and we lost the Anani HaKavod. Three, in the time of Haman. So keep those three things in mind. And now let's look at the reasons why we are vulnerable to Amalek. Amalek is a demonic evil force that seeks our utter obliteration. But it's very clear from the Chumash that Amalek is not only hating the Jews, Amalek hates God. Amalek is waging war against the Almighty. Amalek is trying to defeat the idea of God in the world. Amalek stands for Mikra, coincidence, happenstance. Amalek stands for power. You know, it's interesting, the closest to Amalek, even more than Hamas, that we've seen in recent centuries is Nazi Germany. That's the closest paradigm to Amalek. And if you read Mein Kampf, I've never read Mein Kampf per se, but if you read Hitler's own book, I hate to say this, I can get in very big trouble for saying it. It is an insane book. It's written by a crazy person. But it's remarkably insightful. Hitler, Yimach Shmo v'Zichro, had a very good understanding of Judaism. And he hated it because of that. Hitler said, Judaism brought conscience into the world. Judaism brought morality into the world. Judaism limited the ability of the strong to control the weak. Now, that sounds like a commercial for Judaism. He was saying, and that's what's so bad about it. Because what matters in the world is power and might and dominion. And it was the Judaism and the Torah that put all of those limits. What is remarkable is that in his insane evil, he understood exactly what the Torah was doing. But as an Amalekite, he hated it. He wanted to destroy it. Right? But at the same time, he understood what it was. And this is what the Torah says. Amalek wages war against God, not just Jewish people. It's a milchama against the morality of the Torah. It's a milchama against the notion that human power should have limits. It's a milchama against the notion that the strong must take care of the weak. All of this, Amalek is against. So, what makes us vulnerable to Amalek? So the Svarim tell us that Amalek has power over us only if there's some aspect of Amalek that exists within our personalities. And as a result, in Kabbalah and Hasidus, the mitzvah of eradicating Amalek is not only a reference to the eradication of the Amalek outside of me, but it's also a reference to the eradication of the Amalek that is within me. So what is the Amalek within me that makes me vulnerable? So what's interesting is, let's compare the first desert attack with the second desert attack, and you can identify two weaknesses that make us vulnerable to Amalek. Weakness number one is the very first time they attacked us. And they attacked us in a place that is called Rephidim. That's the name of the place. Right? Vayavo b'nei Yisrael Rephidim, and Amalek attacked us. But Chazal say Rephidim is not only a place, but Rephidim is an acronym for a certain attitude. Rephidim. Rafu Yadayim Min HaTorah. Now, translated literally, this is an idiomatic expression that doesn't really have an English counterpart. It literally means, Rafu Yadayim, their hands were weak towards the Torah. What does the idiom mean? Let's imagine you're crossing the street. You're crossing a busy street. You're crossing King George. And you have to hold your baby. Well, God forbid, you don't want to drop your baby. So something you care about a lot, you hold very tight. When you don't care so much, let's assume you're holding a tissue in your hand. You blew your nose and you have a tissue. Now, even if you're not a litterer, unfortunately too many people do litter, but let's assume you don't intentionally litter. But if it blew out of your hand, it wouldn't be the biggest tragedy in the world. So you hold something loose. So this is an idiom. When we talk about your hands are loose, your hands are weak, that means you don't care so much about it. Amalek attacks us when our attitude towards Torah learning and Torah mitzvahs, we lack passion, we lack excitement, we lack geschmack, we're complacent. Even if we're from, we do the mitzvahs, but we do so without a brand, without fire, without enthusiasm, complacency, boredom, coldness of the spirit. Because after all, Amalek represents coldness. Now, Chazal see this in the word Rephidim, Rafu Yedei Min HaTorah. The first Achilles heel that makes us vulnerable to Amalek is the indifference and lack of passion we have for Ruchnius. And this is a problem not only for those who don't keep mitzvahs. It might be a greater problem for those who do keep mitzvahs. We do things out of habit. We go through the motions. Sometimes we even resent, cleaning up for Pesach or whatever it will be. Right? We don't have a geschmack in our ruchnius. That's a rifya in yedayim and atayra. And when there's that coldness, that's the root that makes us vulnerable to Amalek. Now, Chazal see that in the word Rephidim. Rav Tzadok sees it in a different word, Asher Korcha Baderech. Now, the word Korcha is a very, very interesting word because there's a lot of different Amalek ideas in that word. One pshat of Korcha is they encountered you in the way. And encounter, mikra, is a word that means coincidence, accident. And that goes to Amalek, lives in the world of mikra. Things are just coincidence. There's no hashgacha, there's no divine providence. So that's one lesson of the Korcha. Rashi gives another lesson of the Korcha, again from the Medrash, That korcha means they made you cold. Korcha made you cold. So Rashi says, the famous mashal, that when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, they were like a boiling hot bath, a scalding hot bath. Everybody was afraid to touch them. They had the 10 plagues and the splitting of the Red Sea. I'm not going to touch these people. Amalek was the very first one who jumped into the boiling hot bath. You jump into a boiling hot bath, you're going to get burnt. Amalek got defeated, to be sure. But you know what happens? The bath is not as hot for the next guy. Meaning Amalek created the precedent that you could try to fight the Jews. Yeah, we lost, but maybe the next guy will win. That's how Rashi understands korcha. They made you cold. They cooled off the bath. Reb Tzadok goes with the same meaning of coldness, but he goes in a different aspect. He says, Amalek represents karirus halev, coldness of the heart. Coldness of the heart. A person has to feel warmth and passion, right? It's very interesting. In some ways, this is a little bit autobiographical. Now, Reb Tzadok was actually born a Misnagate. Reb Tzadok was not born into a Hasidic family. And he became a Chassid in his 20s. And he was a genius. He was a genius from a very young age. Shas, Poskim, he knew everything. But he became a chassid a little bit older. And the story goes that, he was wandering around Europe, meeting different Gedolim, different Rabbanim. And he walked into the Ishbitzer Shtibel, the Ishbitzer, who was his Rebbe, the Mei Shiluach, Suda Shalishis. And the Ishbitzer was talking. And Hasidim were listening, not listening. They're used to it. They were not necessarily so moved. But Rav Tzadok was transfixed. He was frozen in place. And all of a sudden he started screaming, the story goes. He says, my heart is on fire, my heart is on fire. And then he grabbed his head. He says, until now, all I was a brain. I wasn't a person. But I want to be a yid. I want to be a person. I want to have a heart. Again, very, very interesting. Rav Tzadok did have a very acute awareness. Even though, if there's any Hasidic Rebbe who could be a bona fide, intellectualized approach, it is Rav Tzadok. But Rav Tzadok was acutely aware that you have to combine, as they said about Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, the classic biography, Moach v'lev, the mind and the heart. And when the heart is not there, says Rav Tzadok, that's karirus. When there's karirus, that's Amalek. Chazal seem to make the same point through the word rafidim, rafu yidayim in Torah. So that's Achilles heel number one. The sheirish of Amalek was rafu yidayim in Torah, or karirus halev, the coldness of the heart. We then come 40 years later. Aaron HaKohen dies. The Ananei HaKavod leave. Amalek, via disguise at least, attacks us. The Meforshim say this is a second Achilles heel. Aaron HaKohen represents, as Pirkei Avos says, the spiritual dimension of Ohev Shalom, V'roidev Shalom, a lover of peace, a pursuer of peace, one who was proactive in trying to make Shalom. Ohev es habriyos, he loved the Ribbono Shel Olam's creations. Umakarvan l'Torah, and the way the Chazam SEFER explains it, quite logically, through the love that he had for everyone, he brought them to Torah. Very important. You don't bring somebody to Torah by denigrating them, by insulting them, by pushing them away. You bring them to Torah by love. In other words, it's not two things. It's not Oye v'sabrios, number one, Mekarvan l'Torah, number two. Rather, it's all connected. Oye v'sabrios, Mekarvan l'Torah. So Aaron is the height of achdus and unity and shalom and love. When he died, there was a weakness. There was a diminution in the achdus and the love in Klal Yisrael. And that is Achilles' heel number two. Pirud, divisiveness, polarization within the Jewish people. Make us vulnerable to Amalek. And the reason is the following. Because Amalek is really from our brother, Esav. How could a brother hate a brother? Right? Esav is our brother. The answer is, Mida keneged Mida. If we hate our brother, or at least we don't have Ava for our brother, our fellow Jew, then we're going to suffer the hatred of someone who should have been our brother in a much more intensive way. Obviously, no Jew behaves like Amalek. But the concept is, if we don't show the Ava that we're supposed to show, then on the other side it gets magnified into the sinna, the violent hatred of Amalek. So you see, these are the two chesronos. The Rafu Yedeya Min HaTorah, the Kriris Halev, is the reason for the first attack. And the Sinas Chinam and lack of Avas Yisrael is the reason for the second attack. So now, let's go to the story of Purim. The story of Purim is the final attempt in Tanakh of Amalek, or a representative of Amalek, to destroy us. What's interesting is, in the time of Purim, we actually see both factors at work. We see, they're a bit subtle, but let's take the Sinas Chinam first. You can see a Sinas Chinam. Remember when Haman is talking to Achashverosh? And Haman is trying to convince Achashverosh that the Jews are worthless, get rid of them, and they don't contribute anything. He says they're scattered and they're, etc., they're not unified together. So remember the important teaching of the Zohar. Hashem's name is not mentioned in Megillas Esther. True. But whenever it says Hamelech, it refers both to Achashverosh on a lower level of meaning and to Hashem on a higher level of meaning. So when it says, Haman said to the Melech about the Jews, A, B, C, and D, that sentence has two meanings. In Pashat Pshat, the human Haman said to the human Achashverosh, and indeed, you don't discard the Pashat Pshat. Haman is talking to Achashverosh. But a higher mystical meaning is the spiritual kayach of Amalek is prosecuting the Jews, speaking to God and saying they're not worthy. Right? Double meaning. You got to read everything. Higher meaning, lower meaning. Pshat meaning, Kabbalistic meaning, so to speak. So, the very first thing that Haman said is, Yeshno Am Echad, there is a nation, Mefozar Umeforad Bein Ha'amim, that is scattered and divided among your nations. So, let's first look at lower meaning, then we'll look at higher meaning. Lower meaning is, human Haman is speaking to human Achashverosh, and is simply making the point that the Jews are not concentrated in one place. You have a few here, a few here, a few here. Therefore, again, Pashat Pshat, they're not able to organize an army. It'll be very easy to kill them because you don't have a large concentration of Jews in any one place. That's lower meaning. Higher and deeper meaning is, the Kayach of Amalek is saying to Hashem, the Jews are undeserving because they're divided amongst themselves. Mefozer Meforet. The very pagam that made us vulnerable. When Aaron died, existed in the Purim story itself. The sinas chinam that existed. Now, it is true that Chazal usually speak of sinas chinam in connection with the destruction of the second temple. Mordechai is right before the construction of the second temple. But nevertheless, the roots of that sinas chinam were already there, the mefozer and meforet. Now, we also see at Megillas Esther the first weakness, complacency, indifference, and lack of passion for the Torah. Now, where do you see that? So again, this is a little subtle. The Gemara in Megillah says that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was asked, why were the Jewish people worthy of being destroyed? Because we actually were on the verge of being destroyed. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's initial answer was because they were nene. When Achashverosh made a party in Shushan, many Jews went, and they enjoyed the party, and they deserved to die because of that. Now the Gemara then asked, well, that's only the Jews in Shushan. What about the other Jews? So we had to come up with other averos. But the very first thing that he said was they were chayav misa because they enjoyed the party of Achashverosh. So the question is obvious. What sin did they commit? They ate treif. They drank wine that non-Jews handled. Those are averos, to be sure. Do you get the death penalty for it? If I eat treif, I don't get killed. I'm not chayav misa for it. So how can you say they're chayav misa because they ate and drank at the party? So says the Sfas Emes, a wonderful teretz. It does not say they're chayav misa because they ate at the party. You're not chayav misa for eating treif. They're chayav misa because they enjoyed the party. Well, what does that mean? If you enjoy the food, you're just eating treif. So here you have to remember something. Why did Achashverosh make the party at the time that he made that party? So there's a complicated Gemara. We don't have time to go through all of the numbers. But essentially, Achashverosh knew that the Jewish people are supposed to be in exile for only 70 years. And he miscalculated where do you start the 70 years from. He was wrong. But based on his calculation, the 70 years were over. And God did not redeem the Jewish people. So the conclusion would be either God changed his mind and is never going to redeem them, or God doesn't have the power, or there is no God, or whatever it is. So this was a party celebrating the fact that the Jews will not be redeemed. So says the Sfas Emes, when it says the Jews enjoyed the party, nenu, it does not refer to the fact that they enjoyed the food and the wine. That's not a chayav misa. But they enjoyed the idea of why there was a party. Who needs a Beis HaMikdash? Who needs Geula? Who needs Eretz Yisrael? We're happy here. We're fine here. What is that called? Complacency, indifference, lack of passion, lack of yearning, lack of growth. We're fine where we are, and we're fine as we are. So it turns out that that's the first pagam, the first defect. Rafu Yedei Min HaTorah. So it's fascinating. If the first time Amalek attacked us was Rafu Yedei Min HaTorah, and the second time Amalek attacked us was sinas chinam and lack of avat Yisrael, the Purim story combines both the Rafu Yedei Min HaTorah and Mefozar Meforad Bein Ha'amim. And this explains why when we finally had the Yeshua and the Geula, and Chazal enacted that we observe a holiday of Purim to give thanks and to celebrate, they built into the holiday mitzvos and rituals that address the defects that made us vulnerable to Amalek in the first place. If Purim is a celebration of the downfall of Amalek, we have to eradicate that within us that makes us vulnerable to Amalek. The tikkun of divisiveness and polarization is obvious in the mitzvahs of Purim. Mishloach manos, give food to people. Matanos li'avyonim, tzedakah, special tzedakah, to take down or to build bridges, to remove barriers, to befriend, to connect. In fact, that's why it's brought down. Many say that sholach manos b'dafka, you should get a shaliach to give sholach manos because you want to get more people involved, called marbe reus, increasing friendship. That's the tikkun, that's the rectification for Mefozer Mefored Ben Amma. By the way, that's why Esther, when Esther proclaimed a fast, her first words were, Lech kanos es kol haYehudim. Come and gather everybody. If the problem is Mefozer Mefored, the tikkun is Lech kanos. Now, Purim is also a tikkun for the lack of passion in Avodas Hashem. And this is, again, in a bit of a subtle way. At the end of the Megillah, when it talks about the holiday of Purim, it mentions Kiyamu v'kiblu. They fulfilled what they had accepted. So Chazal have a drasha, it's an awkward language. They re-accepted God's Torah that they had accepted at Sinai. At Sinai, they accepted God's Torah under duress, compulsion. We'll have to save this for another time to try to explain that. But it says God held a mountain over their heads and said, if you accept the Torah, that's good. If not, I'll crush you. So Shavuos is Kabbalah Satira out of fear, trepidation, a certain degree of coercion and duress. On Purim, we accept it out of love and gratitude, that which he had previously accepted out of fear. So Purim is Kabbalat HaTorah Bi'ava, Kabbalah Satira with love. What is the difference between doing something out of love and doing something out of fear? Well, there are many differences, but one of the differences is the passion and excitement you have when you do it. When you do something out of fear, you do as much as you need to not to get hurt. But you don't have enthusiasm. You don't have geschmack. When you do it out of love, you love what you're doing. Memela, if Amalek attacks us because we're complacent, we have lack of passion, Kabbalas HaTorah Me'ava is a tikkun for the coldness of the heart and the rafu yedei min HaTorah. So it's fascinating that we became vulnerable on Purim because we had the two weaknesses of Amalek. And when we celebrate Purim, we have to address both of those weaknesses. So again, Be'ezras Hashem, may Purim be a zman of Geula, zman of Yeshua. We say in Shoshanas Yaakov, the song that we sing after Megillah, it's part of a longer piyut really, that Shuas la'idiyah shekol tevecha lo yevaishu lo yikalmu l'netzach kol ha'chaisim bach, that you are their salvation in every generation, and you have made known to us that those who trust in you and those who seek refuge in you will not be ashamed, will not be humiliated forever. And Be'ezras Hashem, may the words of that tefillah be mekuyam. So have a good Shabbos. Good Yom Tov. Yiboneh